Hi, it's Jonathan Shrager here for Stretty News TV. I'm joined today by BBC Red Wednesday host Bill Rice. How are we doing, Bill?
Yeah, I'm all right, thank you. How are you?
Very good, very good. So how did your role as the host of BBC Radio Manchester's Red Wednesday come about?
I was very lucky, to be honest. I mean, I've always been a massive football fan, so I always wanted to be involved in football in some way. And like any kid, you get to a certain age, you realise you're not going to be good enough to play the game for a living. You're looking for the alternative. Yeah. So going into journalism and becoming a football reporter was something that I looked at. I thought that's what I want to do with myself. So off I went to get as much experience as I could. Ended up working at BBC Radio Manchester, and to be honest, the Red Wednesday thing just came along. It wasn't something I was particularly chasing, but obviously to cover Manchester United week in, week out and talk about them every Wednesday night on BBC Radio Manchester is a dream come true.
Yeah. And are you are you born and bred in the north yourself? Are you a Manchester lad?
No, not at all actually. I was born in Boston in Lincolnshire, but I moved around quite a lot. So I've lived in Lincolnshire, Nottinghamshire, Northamptonshire, spent some time in Kent and Sussex as well, and then moved up to Lancashire, or to Manchester first, but I now live in Lancashire. So I'm one of them people that doesn't tend to stay in one place for too long, but obviously this BBC Sport building and Radio Manchester covering United gives me a great job, so yeah. I'm not looking to move anytime soon again, but you never know.
Absolutely. So I mean, in terms of your own football supportership, shall we say, who are you originally a fan of? Are you originally a United fan?
Well, I as a kid, I grew up really supporting Nottingham Forest. They were my nearest big club as a kid, and my cousins were big Forest fans, so influenced by them, I always kept an eye out for Forest results. But myself, I would say really I'm a Kettering Town fan. I started watching them as a teenager, and that was my real experience of going to the match and watching the game. Yeah. I don't get to see them very often these days, and obviously I see United week in, week out, so I've got a bit of an affiliation to them. I wouldn't say I'm particularly a fan of any team. I know it's a bit of a cop-out, but it's just football that I love watching, and you know, my dad's a big Celtic fan, so I've obviously got an interest in them. But English teams, as a kid, it was always United and Liverpool. Those were the big two that were on TV, and you were one or the other. So obviously I fell into the United camp.
And obviously during your time covering United, then has that endeared you to the club as well? Obviously, do you look out for them in terms of actually, willing them to win, as well as covering them?
I think inevitably you want them to do well, because you're watching them week in, week out, and you get to know some of the players, and you get to obviously get to know them and get to feel for them. So you want them to do well, and you want the team to do well. You watch them week in, week out, you see how they play, you kind of develop an interest in their style. I haven't got any particular loyalty to the club, I have to say that, but if you're going to pick one club in the country to watch, I think Manchester United is the one. It's the biggest club in the country, and it's certainly the one that generates the biggest column inches.
Absolutely, and obviously as the host of BBC Red Wednesday, there sort of presupposes a little bit of partiality towards the team. Presumably the BBC would expect that anyway. It's not as if you would have to remain impartial.
Well, it's a difficult line for us to tread, to be honest, but Red Wednesday is a fanzine programme, so we talk to supporters. The guests are always fans of Manchester United. The guests are often ex-players or people who have an affiliation to the club. So we want the club to do well, and we're all supporting the club when we're here talking about it. I think that comes across in the programme. It is positive. Some people say too positive, but you can never keep everyone happy all of the time. But there's that impartiality is always in the back of your mind. You have to be fair. As a BBC journalist, it's always in the front of your mind, not even the back of your mind. But you have to be fair. You have to be impartial, and there's always examples of that. The singing section debate recently has been a prime one where you can't side with the club or the supporters. You have to listen to everybody's views and give as balanced an argument as you can.
Yeah. And then I was going to ask, obviously, your role means that you've sort of had this access to a lot of ex-United players, and you've collaborated with them on a work level and probably spent time with them outside of work as well. Of all the Reds, the ex-Reds who you've worked alongside, who would you say is the best raconteur or the funniest?
Blimey, you're right. You're blessed, really, to get to meet these people. It's when you see other people outside stadiums come up and speak to them and see how excited they get. You realise how lucky you really are. Sometimes it becomes the day job to go to Old Trafford and to watch the game alongside an ex-player. So it's good to get those reminders just how lucky you are and how special a job it is. I think Andy Ritchie's obviously got a great sense of humour, the former United striker. One of my favourites, if we ever get to do games down in London, I often catch up with the former United striker Terry Gibson, who obviously does a lot of work for Sky as well on their Spanish football. Don't get to see him that often, but he's a great guy. He's really fun to be around, huge enthusiasm, great passion for the game. I think this season Danny Higginbottom is another one we've used on a couple of occasions on Red Wednesday. Fantastic insight into the game, knows the dressing room very well, knows a lot of the players still at United, so he's always great to talk to as well.
Yeah. And are there any kind of any amusing anecdotes that you're able to divulge as regarding any United alumni that you've spent time with as a byproduct of working with them outside of work, maybe?
Oh blimey, now you're putting me on the spot. I'm sure there is, but I can't think of anything off the top of my head, and it's probably best to keep my counsel on that one anyway. I don't want to get anyone in too much trouble.
Okay. No, because obviously you mentioned before you might be having a beer with a few people next week, so obviously you do spend time outside of work as well, socialising.
I mean, we try and socialise. Obviously you get to know people better if you just spend time with them just talking, so it's not just about the stuff we do here in the studio on air. We try and speak, I talk to these people on a weekly basis, sometimes a daily basis. They're all my contacts, they're all people I speak to, as well as talking to fans and people who work at the club. I'm talking to players, ex-players, just trying to sound them out about what's going on at the club, find out if they've got any information, and quite often they've got strong opinions on what's going on at the club, so it's always good to talk to them.
Absolutely. Do you gain a lot of access to to interview or to talk to the current crop of players? Because obviously there is this reputation now around the club that gaining access is a lot more difficult than it ever has been before. Yeah,
well, I think it is more difficult now than it's ever been before, and like any journalist, I'll say we don't get anywhere near the access that we'd like, but I'm sure that's always been the case. I'm sure people always want more, no matter what the level of access. It's difficult. BBC Radio Manchester doesn't have a commentary deal with Manchester United, so we can't do commentary of Premier League games. Subsequently, we don't have any broadcast rights to post-match interviews, so we're relying on the club whether they want to put anyone up to talk to us or not. Some players are very good. They'll stop in mixed zones, they'll have a chat with you, they'll be very friendly, very personable. Other players less so, but you don't feel like you have that attachment to them that perhaps journalists had in years gone by. And I think the fans feel the same. They don't have the connection with the players that they used to have in years gone by. Unfortunately, the game has become so high profile now, and the players are so sort of in demand by sponsors and by supporters that it's impossible for them to spend time with everyone. But it does make it difficult, and I think if you look at the old days, and not that we're ever going to go back there, but the days when players and journalists and supporters could all spend time together and maybe even talk to each other after a game are long gone. And it's a shame, because that helped the relationships develop between them. And I think if you spend time with the players, you'd perhaps have a better insight into being able to write pieces about them or broadcast things about them on the radio. You would know them better, and subsequently they would know you better, so they'd be more trusting and more sort of able to approach you if they wanted to. So some of that's been lost, and it's a shame.
So, and obviously you alluded to it there in the sort of media zones after games and what have you. You said that some players that there are personable players that you can chat to. Is there any in particular that you enjoy chatting to post game?
Well, I mean, my favourite of the current United squad to talk to is always Patrice Evra, because I think he's fascinating. He's funny, he's bright, he's witty, he's a fantastic speaker in English. He's always got an opinion, he's always very passionate, which is great to see from a Manchester United player. He's in fact so passionate and so honest and forthright that sometimes the club don't want him to speak, which I think tells you everything you need to know. But he's a great one. But there's several members of the squad that I enjoy talking to. The likes of Michael Carrick and Darren Fletcher are very friendly, very good people, good pros. They'll come out and talk to you. Sometimes they probably don't want to after a bad result, but they'll never be afraid to step up and say what they think. And you, as a journalist, you really appreciate when you speak to people like that, them taking the time out to do it, because it's not so much if you're stood in a mix zone and 9 players walk past and say, no, I don't want to do it, you can't feel bad about that, and you don't have a problem with it. It's the times when you feel like you're almost begging the players, and sometimes they don't even acknowledge you. Sometimes they just put their head down or look at you like they're a bit of dirt. you're a bit of dirt on their shoe. That's when it's difficult to take. You're just trying to do your job same as they are.
Yeah.
And the majority of them are fine. And as I say, that they will stop, or if they can't stop, they'll say no, sorry, and that's fine. But there are occasions with some players you just think, you really should be treating us with a little bit more respect than that.
Yeah. And then sort of alluded to it before a little bit. I mean, it might be slightly before your time working at the BBC, but obviously it was well documented. Sir Alex Ferguson, he had a little bit of a spat with the BBC, which consequently meant that he wouldn't give interviews on Match of the Day for a while. Was this before your time working here at the BBC?
The initial documentary was long before my time, yeah, but Ferguson still had his stance of not talking to the BBC when I started working for the corporation, so it's something that we had to deal with, yeah.
And that transcended into all platforms at the BBC, did it? So obviously radio, online, as well as Match of the Day.
Yeah, essentially Sir Alex Ferguson didn't want to talk to the BBC. He did on exception. For example, he appeared on Sports Personality to present an award to Sir Bobby Robson because that was something that was important to him. I think he spoke on a couple of racing programmes on Radio 4 and on TV as well. But essentially, in terms of the pre and post match stuff, his press conference on a Friday and his post match interviews with television radio, he wouldn't speak to the BBC. It was difficult. I even remember one time in the tunnel at Old Trafford when Jonathan Pearce was there for Match of the Day, and Sir Alex had a very civil conversation with Jonathan right in front of us, and it essentially boiled down to, I've got no sort of personal agenda against you, but I won't speak to the BBC. It's been frustrating for everyone at the BBC because you wanted to speak to Sir Alex Ferguson. He was the biggest name in football at the time, but the BBC stood by their documentary. Sir Alex Ferguson obviously stood by his stance, and that's why it took so long for them to get around the table and resolve it. Yeah.
And sort of to end today, any kind of advice for any aspiring journalists or people that want to work inside football media?
Well, I think the majority of people that want to work in football media love the game. It's certainly where I came from. I just loved football. I loved playing it. I loved watching it. As I say, I didn't even have a particular loyalty to a team growing up. Not a close affiliation. I had teams that I watched. I watched United on TV. I saw Forest every now and then, and I didn't really start going to watch football until I was a teenager. But I just loved the game, and I think most people do love the game. So don't lose that would be my first message to people, because I think it's easy when you get into this industry. You see the other side of football. You see players that don't want to talk to the media. You see press officers that are perhaps a little difficult. You see the hanging around in freezing cold conditions waiting for people to turn up for interviews that probably then give you nothing or a tiny sound bite. You see the difficulties, you see the messing around, arriving at games early, staying at games late, the long travelling, everything the fans have and maybe a little bit more. And I think it'd be easy to fall out of love with the game in many ways. And I know people who have, and I think that's really sad. That's what I've always tried to keep, is remember why you got into it in the first place. It's because you love football. But you will have to work hard, make no mistake about it. People think it's a great job because you get to watch football. Actually, when all your mates are on the beer and you're still sat there writing your copy or producing your programme, you might be a little frustrated. You'll be working every weekend, you'll be working Sundays, you'll be doing earlies, you'll be doing lates, you'll never get time off during the football season. Your family and friends will despair about the fact you can never actually go to any functions or gatherings because there's always a game on. So it's not, I'm not going to say it's a bad thing, it's a dream job. I love my job and I wouldn't swap it for anything. But it's hard work, and if you want to be a success, you have to work very hard, and you will have to make sacrifices. But it's well worth making those sacrifices because the job is brilliant.
Lovely. Actually, just one more question that's just sprung to mind there while you're talking. What's your overridingly, I don't know, your abiding memory of covering United? The sort of overriding memory, the positive one occasion maybe that you just were in awe of when you were covering the Reds?
Oh, blimey. I mean, my favourite trip covering United would probably be going to Real Madrid last year for the Champions League. Last 16 tie. It was somewhere that I've never been able to go myself. I've never had the opportunity to go to Madrid, never had an opportunity to go watch football there. So to be out there working and be inside the Bernabeu was just, wow, this is incredible. It's a fantastic stadium, great atmosphere, and here I am watching Manchester United, and somebody wants me to be here, and I'm being paid to be here rather than shelling out a fortune. So that was pretty special.
Yeah.
But I think the biggest story I've covered without doubt was Sir Alex Ferguson's retirement last year. It just went into absolute meltdown when the news came through. I spent who knows how many hours outside Old Trafford. It was really hectic, but it was the kind of story that you want to. It's the reason you get into journalism. You want to cover the big news, and it was exciting. It was dramatic. I learnt a lot from it. There's things I'd do different if it happened again, and with David Moyes sacking, it kind of did happen again, so we had to go through it all again. But that was an incredible day, and I think the 2 weeks after that, the final home game against Swansea was a really, really special day. And less so, but the final match away at West Brom was tinged with a little sadness, but a very emotional occasion. So I think I've just been fortunate to be at some big games. You know, supporters of Manchester United will give up so much. I think they sacrifice a huge amount. I don't know how they find the money, I don't know how they find the time to follow the club all over Europe, and so I'd sort of tip my hat to them. I think they do a sterling job, and I'm just lucky that I get to do it, obviously for the BBC.
And you touched upon it there with Fergie when he left. At that time, had the impasse between the BBC and Fergie been resolved?
Yeah, absolutely.
So you were able to cover that more in depth at the time?
Yeah, Sir Alex Ferguson's last season in charge at Manchester United, I was at his press conferences every week for BBC Radio, so I was there on behalf of 5 Live and Radio Manchester, asking questions, obviously recording the audio, filing it back into a new building here in Salford. So I did have I had time to get to know him, not well. I didn't sit down with him at length or do one-to-one interviews with him every week, but I was in his press conferences. I'd ask him questions. Yeah. Got one or two minor tongue lashings off him, nothing too serious. Didn't really feel the full force of the hairdryer, but I was lucky enough to see him, and I think if you're going back to sort of great memories, it's not a game, but I think one of Sir Alex Ferguson's finest moments was a press conference at Old Trafford for a Champions League game, when he kind of shocked the world by telling everyone that Wayne Rooney wanted to leave the club. He really put on a masterclass that day, Sir Alex Ferguson. He came across as a frustrated and confused man, sort of, a little bit disappointed in Wayne's actions, and I think everyone who walked out of there felt that he seemed a little vulnerable. He seemed he seemed a little timid that day. I think it was a masterstroke from Sir Alex, because a few days later, obviously the new contract was signed and Wayne was staying, and whatever went on behind the scenes, I think we saw there. Sir Alex Ferguson was always at his best when his back was against the wall, and I think that is the real challenge for whoever the next Manchester United manager is. It's not just about when times are going well, it's about this club brings so much scrutiny and so much media talk and paper talk, and everyone's obsessed with Manchester United. So it's when things are difficult how you respond to that, and Sir Alex was the best at that, without a doubt.
And by contrast, obviously recently David Moyes has been sacked. He struggled in the times of adversity, obviously.
I feel for David Moyes. I do think he's a good manager. I just think it didn't really work out for him at Manchester United. He didn't help himself. I don't think he was always making the wisest statements in the media. I wonder if the job was just a bit too big for him at the time. It was always going to be difficult for anyone following Sir Alex, but he had to deal with it better, and it was in the adversity that he struggled. Nobody expected United to carry on without any problems, but things just went from bad to worse under David, and he seemed to lose some of the players. He certainly lost some of the supporters, and ultimately it cost him his job. We may never know exactly what went on behind the scenes, but I think that's the difference. Is Sir Alex Ferguson controlled everything at Manchester United, and David Moyes just couldn't do that.
Yeah. Well, thanks a lot for your time today, Bill. Really appreciate it.
No, thank you.
Yeah. And Dave Sexton succeeded him. So, I mean, what were your kind of abiding memories of playing under both those managers?
Well, Tommy wasn't there that long